You're listening to Mission Eve, a podcast that explores the stories of women who are opening the frontier of space to humanity. Your host is Meagan Crawford, managing partner of Space Fund, a venture capital firm investing in the space industry. She is a mother, volunteer, founder, and true believer in humanity's future in space. Mission Eve is meant to inspire the girls of today who will be the women of tomorrow, leading our first permanent off-world settlements. Space needs women. Space needs you.
Welcome to Mission Eve. I'm Meagan Crawford, and today I am thrilled to welcome Andrea Harrington to the podcast. And we're going to be talking a little bit about what's brought her into the space industry and what she does. So thank you for coming on the show.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And it's an honor to be given the opportunity to try to help inspire girls and women to get involved in the space industry. It's something I'm really passionate about.
Well, we're thrilled to have you. So I'd like to talk a little bit today about kind of how you got here, how you got to the space industry, and then we'll talk a little bit about what you do. So let's start at the beginning. Where were you born? Where'd you grow up? And did anything in your early life help influence you to move towards the space industry?
So I grew up in the greater Boston area. I will say the greater Boston area because it's a running joke that everyone says they're from Boston when they're really from Eastern Massachusetts. So I'm clarifying there. My mom was actually really a big inspiration for me in terms of getting me interested in space because we would watch launches on television live as they happened, which was very interesting. And also she was a big fan of science fiction. And so we would watch Star Trek and other science fiction shows when I was a little kid. And I just got used to that being kind of the norm around the house. And that really drew my attention. And it was kind of interesting because I never realized that that was a predominantly male set of interests until I was much, much older, because it was something that I developed with my mom. And so I didn't see the difference there in terms of gender perception, which when I was a kid, apparently, that was very much, science fiction. And then watching things like Ninja Turtles was much more of a boy activity, if you will, than a girl activity. So I appreciate that fact about my mom, too, that she never pointed out, oh, yeah, you have boy interests and let me have space wallpaper with glow-in-the-dark astronauts and planets and stuff like that all over my room.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So were there any defining moments in your childhood that inspired you to be interested in space? Are there any, you just mentioned your mom being pretty influential on that, but were there any other people that you met that kind of helped steer you that direction?
To be honest, I don't really think so. Being from the Boston area, JFK was obviously a major figure in our history and our culture growing up. And so in school, they would bring us to the JFK library and things like that as part of field trips. And so, that speech about going to the moon and why we're going to the moon is something that I started hearing very early on as a child. And so not a person that I met, but something that I was exposed to that had that influence. It's interesting, even if you go back to Boston now, every time I land at Logan Airport, they still have the big poster with JFK and the quotes, and you can hear the speech with the heavy Boston accent playing in the background when you go through certain channels to exit from Logan Airport. So I think being from the Boston area really does kind of influence that perception, at least attention to the Apollo missions.
Excellent. Excellent. So did you ever go to space camp?
I did not go to space camp. I really wanted to go to space camp as a little kid. It was something that seemed really, really exciting, but that was not something that was within the financial capabilities of my family at the time. And I think my parents, felt really badly that they couldn't send me to space camp, but it's a really expensive endeavor. And even now I hear a lot of folks saying, oh, what's a great way to inspire kids to get involved in space? Send them to space camp. Oh, look at all the kids that go through space camp. And it's true for the kids who are able to get there, who are either close enough and have the money to get there. And so, I would say the majority of folks probably can't afford to go to space camp, and that's okay. And there are other ways to get interested and involved, and not being able to start that early is not necessarily a hindrance, but a lot of folks who wind up in the space industry didn't necessarily get that opportunity for whatever reason. And so for folks who haven't managed to do that, it's not the end of the road.
Yeah, and that's a fantastic point. I agree with you completely. There's a lot of other exciting things to do. When I was young, I was in Girl Scouts, and we went on a Girl Scout trip that was space themed, but it was local and it wasn't expensive because it was through the Girl Scouts, and so and we did some stargazing and all of that stuff. So I completely agree. There's a lot of other ways to have that exposure. So. Moving forward in life a little bit here, talk to me about college and what you studied and kind of how that led you to your career where you are now.
So before college, when I was deciding what I was going to major in, I was very heavily involved in Model United Nations, which I think was really a great experience for me and was also very influential in learning how to negotiate with other people, how to compromise, how to interact with folks that you necessarily haven't met before, and be able to achieve objectives. And so I found that to be really influential, also learning about other countries and other cultures. And so I decided that I wanted to study international relations in
Just
college.
Out of curiosity, what was your which country did you represent in Model UN?
So I participated in quite a variety of different competitions, but my very first one, which was actually in 8th grade, they brought an 8th grade team to the high school competition solely because the high school team coach, his son was in 8th grade. And so he persuaded one of the middle school teachers to bring a team of 8th graders because that was the earliest grade that was allowed at the competition so that his son could go and get prepped to do it for high school. And so that's the only year, I believe, that our middle school sent a team. But I went on that team. There were 6 of us and we were El Salvador. I don't remember which committee I was in, but we were talking about agriculture. And I got up and gave this impassioned and totally unknowledgeable speech about the burdens of enforcing crop rotation on El Salvadoran farmers.
Wonderful.
But it turned out to be really a life-changing experience for me that I continued participating and representing a number of countries through high school and even then when I did get to college. But I decided that I wanted to major in international relations and I looked at a variety of different schools, and Boston University actually had a separate international relations department, whereas most schools have international relations as a concentration within the political science department. And there are actually some pretty substantial differences you get from having a separate department versus having it within another program in another department. And so I decided I wanted to go to BU. I applied early and was very fortunate that I got a substantial amount of scholarship money and grant money that enabled me to go to BU. And that brings me to another point that I would really like to make, and that's that despite whatever your educational background or socioeconomic background might be, there are opportunities to get education without burdening yourself with excessive amounts of student loans. And there are ways to get involved in the space industry, even though it does require, for a lot of different fields within the space industry anyway, substantial education. And so I come from a very blue-collar background. My mom has always been in customer service. And my dad is a truck driver. He now owns a few trucks and has folks who drive for him. He's become sort of a trucking entrepreneur, if you will, but started out driving just one truck, owner-operator. And so I feel very lucky that my parents were incredibly supportive of my education and my educational goals, even though their life experiences had been very different. And so here I am now, a graduate of Boston University with 4 graduate degrees beyond that, teaching as a professor in the space industry and getting to do all of the things that I'm doing now. And I just encourage everyone, don't let yourself be limited by what your background is or by what your parents did. Find your path, find your way. There are ways to do it that you're not going to be overwhelmed with the student loan challenges that a lot of people face if you really explore all of your options. Fellowships, scholarships, grants are out there, even if they're not directly through the institution that you're attending. And I mean, at points I had to work to put myself through school to not have to take out a lot of burdensome loans. And there are ways to do that. So don't give up hope.
Excellent. So let's talk a little bit about these 4 graduate degrees. You just kind of threw that out there. So yeah, what are they all?
Okay. So the first one that I did is a master's degree, master's in political science, it's European politics and governance was the focus, which I did at the London School of Economics in the UK. I was really interested, as I mentioned, in international politics in undergrad, and I thought the European Union was just fascinating, and I really wanted to learn more because this was such a unique development in human history. And so I decided to go to Europe and study European politics. It wasn't until after that I realized there's not a whole lot as an American that you can do with a master's degree in European politics and governance. But also, as a sort of point of amusement, my master's thesis for that degree was about how the City of London, which is the financial district of London, would cope with switching to the euro if the UK did that, and whether that would actually be a good thing or a bad thing for the City of London. So my master's thesis is quite a bit dated at this point now, considering what's gone on in current events. My second graduate degree is my JD. So I am a lawyer. I went to law school at the University of Connecticut. I went my first year as a full-time day student, and then I switched to the evening division, worked full-time through my second and third year of law school, and I graduated fourth in my class out of 160, which I, given working full-time through the second and third year, impressive. I feel is an accomplishment. And so I went from there. I took the bar in Massachusetts, which is where I'm from, passed the bar in Massachusetts. And I was already working at an insurance company in their wardings department. I had started in compliance because I had done compliance work before law school. And so they hired me in their compliance department, and I transferred into wordings to do contract drafting for an insurance company. And so they kept me on at the end of law school. And so that's what I did for a little while. I was drafting insurance contracts. When I decided I wanted to get involved in the space industry, I had a moment where I was sitting at my desk one day at work, and I thought, I don't mind my job. I don't mind getting up and coming to work every day. Everything is fine. It's interesting. But I thought, if I keep doing this for the rest of my career, when I eventually get to retirement, I'm going to look back and say, well, what did I do with my career other than have a stable job that, paid the bills and that sort of thing? And I decided I needed to do something that I was really passionate about. And I found out about space law. I previously did not know that there was a field that really was devoted to space law, and that we had these treaties involving outer space, and that we had all this domestic law in Title 51 of the US Code. And so when I found that out, I started looking into programs to refocus myself into space law. And I wound up going to McGill University in Montreal to do a master's in air and space law. And I got a fellowship from them that paid the tuition for me to do that program, which was really great. The Arsenault Family Foundation Fellowship. The Arsenault family also has started Secure World Foundation, which I'm not sure if you've heard about them, but we've got speakers at the conference this week from Secure World, and they're a really influential nonprofit organization dealing with space sustainability and space cooperation. So the Arsenauts have really done a lot for space in general. But they sponsor this fellowship. So I did my master's at McGill, and I always thought I might be interested in teaching, and I applied to the doctoral program so that I would be more qualified to teach, got into the doctoral program, went straight from the master's into the doctorate, and was fortunate to get the doctoral level fellowship from the Arsenault Family Foundation as well to be able to propel myself through that program. And I found other opportunities as well. So the PEO, which is a women's educational foundation. I managed to get another scholarship through them as well to supplement the fellowship for 1 year so that I could really focus on writing my dissertation and also be able to go to different conferences and speak and really get my name out there and get involved in the industry. And so that's how I've wound up with 4 graduate degrees.
Wow. That sounds like quite a journey. So you've graduated, you're a lawyer. You've got a PhD. What next? What happened next? What was the plan for what to do with this PhD?
So while I was still ABD, I saw an opportunity that was posted for
Tell the audience what ABD means for those who don't know.
Sorry, all but dissertation. So when you're doing a doctorate, if you've satisfied all of your requirements up until the point of submitting your dissertation and defending your dissertation, it's your ABD, which means you've also satisfied your residence requirements and you don't have to be physically on campus at your university anymore. So when I was ABD, there was an opportunity that popped up at the University of Mississippi School of Law to teach in their air and space law program. And if you don't know, there are very few of these programs in the world. So in the United States, we have 2 space law programs, one of which is at Mississippi and the other one's at the University of Nebraska. That one is a telecom and space law program, Mississippi's air and space law. And at McGill, I had really focused on air and space law because that's what the McGill program is like. And so that seemed like really the perfect fit for me. I applied to that job and got the job. And I moved down to Mississippi. Sight unseen, actually, they had done all of my interviews with the committee on video. So I had never set foot in the state of Mississippi. And I moved down to Oxford, which is the town that the University of Mississippi is in. And I started teaching there, and I became the associate director of their programs and really got to have a substantial influence over the curriculum development and what we were offering and how the programs were working. And I initiated the process of getting a graduate certificate program in addition to the master's program and the JD concentration program there. So when I arrived, they had the JD concentration and then the master's. And now there's also the graduate certificate, which is for non-lawyers.
What advice would you give somebody who is interested in breaking into space law? What do you wish you had known before you started on that journey of getting yourself into this field?
So I think I figured out pretty early on what was going to help me personally get there. And that's the advice that I would pass on to other folks as well. And that's twofold. First, if you can go to conferences, go to conferences. Networking is essential. Space law is a very small field. There are not a lot of people doing this. We're going to need more of them in the future. So I think it's a great time to get involved. But if you meet the people and get your face and your name and your work in front of the people who are already in the industry, that is how you are going to break in and succeed. And as I say that, also honor your commitments. So if you commit to do something, make sure that you can and that you're going to fulfill that, because the impression that you make on the folks in the community is going to set the tone for whether or not you're going to be offered jobs and offered other opportunities, offered speaking engagements, etc. So if you can make a positive impression on a small number of people in the space law field, that's how you're going to succeed.
Excellent. That's great advice. So you've after you got that first job in Mississippi, then what next? You spent some time there. You helped develop the program. How'd you end up at the Air Force?
So I saw a post for the position at Air Command and Staff College that they were starting up a brand new space immersion concentration. And I didn't know what Air Command and Staff College was at the time, but I had a number of friends who are JAGs, who are lawyers in the Air Force, because the Air Force sends JAGs on an annual basis to McGill to study air and space law. And so I contacted my friend who was my classmate. Several others were my students or folks that I coached in the moot court competition while I was there. But I contacted the one who's a very good friend of mine, who's a classmate. And I said, what's this Air Command and Staff College all about? Do you know anything about this space immersion concentration? And, can you help me understand if this is something that maybe I should apply for? And so we talked about it, and she thought it would be a great fit and that I should apply for it. And so I thought, well, why not? I applied and I got a phone interview. Ironically, it had been several months, so I assumed that it had moved along without me, and signed a contract to get my kitchen remodeled. Literally within 24 hours of signing the contract to get my kitchen in Mississippi remodeled, I got the phone interview. And so I had the phone interview. I got invited to do an on-campus interview. I went and I did the job talk and met the faculty, met the department chairs and the dean, et cetera. And they wound up offering me the position. And I decided that I would be able to have a big impact if I went and taught for the Air Force. They didn't have anybody doing law on the faculty. And I thought, well, the Air Force is such a major player in the development of space right now. I really want those folks who are the upcoming leaders of the Air Force, the majors who are being pushed into this program, to really have an understanding of what the international space law looks like, what international law looks like, and make sure that's a part of the development of the new programs and the new policies in the Air Force going forward. And so if I don't do it, who's going to do it? So I took the job and moved on over, and I was there a little under a year when the director position came up for the space concentration. And so I applied for that. And so now I'm the director of the Schriever Scholars, which is our space immersion program. And this is a good point for me to say anything that I'm saying during the podcast is not the views or the opinions of the Air Force or the Department of Defense or Air Command and Staff College. These are my personal views and my own opinions that I'm expressing in this podcast.
Spoken like a true lawyer. I appreciate that. So tell me about like your day-to-day job. What does being the director of the department do? Do you do any teaching still, or is it more kind of administrative work? What's your day like?
So it's both. So we made a bunch of curriculum changes because it was the first year of the program. And so we're refining and making it better. So I've done work with the other faculty members in order to revise some of the coursework and what we're requiring the students to do. So we're giving them more elective options now, whereas last year they had mandatory courses. They didn't have any options to take electives. Their ACSC classmates do. And we thought there would be value in restructuring the curriculum so we could allow that and making changes in general. So I'm going to be teaching International Security 1 again this year, which I taught last year. But this year I'll be teaching it just to the space folks, and we're going to do a space focus. So the rest of ACSC won't get the space focus on their international security course, but my students in the space group will. Last year I taught, before I was director, International Security 1 and 2 to the general ACSC population. I will also be teaching electives both for the space students and for anybody else who wishes to take them. International Space Law and Policy is an elective I'm going to offer, which is an elective that I offered last year as well. That's really my bread and butter, and that's what I do. I'm also going to be offering a brand new elective this year, which is Sci-Fi and Military Culture, which I'm really excited about because I think that as we are looking at the development of defense space and seeing how that's going to change with the stand-up of U.S. Space Command and potentially the creation of a Space Corps or a Space Force, that we need to be thinking about what kind of culture we want our space service, wherever it may be, in the Air Force or not, to have. And if you look at the different military cultures of each of the branches, they're all quite distinct in terms of how they look at the world. And so we're going to look at science fiction and try to decide, you know, as a group of students and in their own views, what they think the ideal military culture would be for a space force or a space corps, or the Air Force operating in space, either way. So I think that's going to be really interesting and exciting. And I will also say that I offer the International Space Law Moot Court Competition, which I have done typically from a law school perspective. So when I was at McGill as a doctoral fellow, I was coaching the team there. And then at Mississippi as a faculty member there, I was coaching the team. And so last year I brought the first ever team from Air Command and Staff College. They competed against a whole bunch of law schools. Coming out of the preliminary rounds, they were ranked first in their division.
Wow.
And then we made it to the semifinals. And unfortunately didn't progress in the semifinals, but we lost to McGill. So that's really not so bad.
Right.
We got the Best New Team Award. And in fact, the students were given a scholarship from NASA as the top performing American citizens to be able to go to IAC in the fall and participate in they have a NASA educational program that also includes some crossover with scholarship recipients from other space agencies at the IAC. And so I'm incredibly impressed. I had one JAG and 2 RPA pilots who had never done law before.
Wow.
And they performed really, really well. So I'm looking forward to having another team to take again this year.
Yeah, that sounds like so much fun. So similarly, in the business world, we do business plan competitions that are and so I did a bunch of that when I was in graduate school, and I'm still doing business plan competitions for the space industry now. So I love the competition model. I think it's great for education and great for getting real world experience. So I love that. That's fantastic. So have you had any, challenges in working in this industry? Like you mentioned, space law it's a pretty small group. You kind of get to know everybody pretty well. Do you find that to be positive or negative? And are there any other kind of challenges about, just being in this unique, specific industry that you're in?
So I will say I have found the smallness of the space law community to actually be a positive. The community is great. The people are very supportive. They're very friendly. And I've really enjoyed being a part of this group. And from that perspective, I think it's made it a lot easier to break in than maybe it would be in a larger field where there are more people and it's harder to make those connections. From a challenge perspective, and I think this is something that anybody who wants to get into certainly space law, but probably the space industry more broadly, is that you can't limit yourself geographically. You have to be willing to go where the work that you want is, rather than to whatever city or state or country that you want to go to. And so early on, when I was at McGill, I had this realization that, hey, I'm not going to be able to necessarily choose where I want to go. Is it more important to me to choose where I want to go, or is it more important to me to choose what I want to do? And I decided it's more important to me to choose what I want to do. And so I found myself as a Bostonian living in Mississippi and actually really enjoyed it, and have now moved to Alabama, and I'm living my best Deep South life. But I wouldn't necessarily have made that choice if it wasn't for those opportunities. And I have no regrets. I'm very pleased that I did. But you have to keep an open mind and just be willing to go where the work takes you. A colleague of mine who taught at Mississippi before I did, he went to North Dakota and he teaches at the University of North Dakota. And he certainly wouldn't have imagined himself in North Dakota other than that opportunity that came up. So I think you just kind of need to keep an open mind in that respect if you're really committed to being involved in space law or the space industry.
What are your long-term career goals? Where do you see yourself in 10 years or 20 years?
10 or 20 years is a long time to think down the road. I mean, I love what I do, and I would like to see myself getting tenure, and maintaining my presence on the conference circuit, being someone that folks will come to for advice and for drafting when looking at new legal and policy options for space. Build my publications. I don't have a specific agenda other than I want to use my career to support the development of human uses of space, whether that's humans in space or not, either way, although I do really hope that we will become a multiplanetary species, to use Elon Musk's term. I look forward to that. Continued exploration and use of outer space for the benefit of humanity is really what I'm all about. And I think that we've seen substantial benefit in terms of exploration, but also in terms of what space has provided to us on Earth in terms of telecommunications, particularly to rural and developing areas, in terms of GPS, which is something great that the Air Force has done for humanity utilizing space. So we get our GPS services thanks to the fact that that program was put up by the US Air Force. And that's something I think a lot of people don't think about a lot of the time.
You mentioned earlier that kind of your favorite part of space law is that international space law and policy. Talk to me a little bit about what's going on in that world right now and what you see as kind of some exciting things, and then what are the challenges that need to be solved to move that forward? Okay,
so I'll take one exciting thing, and to me that would be space mining, or more accurately, space resource utilization. That's something that's being discussed very heavily right now. So I was at the UN Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space Legal Subcommittee in April, UN COPUOS Legal Subcommittee in April. And that was a topic that was very heavily discussed at the international level in terms of, okay, what are the norms for use of space resources? Because that's now something that's becoming technologically feasible, and that several countries actually have domestic legislation dealing with, because we anticipate this coming up in the future. And so that's really exciting and cutting edge. So directly from there, I went to the meeting of the Hague International Space Resources Governance Working Group, which is a smaller subset of folks who are trying to draft building blocks to say, okay, here's what the Outer Space Treaty says. How do we apply that to use of space resources in a way that's going to provide regulatory certainty for businesses moving forward who are going to want to engage in these activities, but also be in compliance with international law? And so this is a topic that's very interesting right now and very hot. And I look forward to see how that continues to develop, because I think there's a lot of benefit, and certainly it will improve our ability to explore and use space if we can utilize space resources, because it means we won't have to launch everything from Earth, because the most expensive part is getting it out of Earth's atmosphere. So if we can get water ice to use for water, for hydrogen, oxygen, etc., then that's going to reduce the cost substantially of continuing to develop activities in outer space. In terms of challenges, space debris is a major problem. And that's something that's being discussed a lot at this conference here at New Space, but being discussed in general quite substantially. Came up in DC a couple weeks ago at the sustainability summits that were happening there. And it's something that has both technical and legal challenges, not to mention certainly the political challenges as well. So anything that can clean up space debris is a dual use item, because if it can approach, come into close proximity, it can be used as a weapon, right? So there's that aspect of any kind of on-orbit servicing or active debris removal. But there's also the fact that you incur liability for your space objects, and liability in international space law flows back to the country, not to the company. So domestically, it might flow to the company, but the country is ultimately going to be responsible if there's damage caused to other state space objects. So if you're trying to clean up debris and something goes wrong, there's potentially an expensive payout at the end of the road. Finally, from a legal perspective, a state, as in a country, maintains their ownership and control over their space object, regardless of whether it's functioning or whether it's broken into a whole bunch of different pieces. So in order to engage in that kind of cleanup, if you can identify what country it belongs to, then you need their permission, their cooperation, to be able to clean up that debris. And again, there's the liability question. So they might be concerned, even just from that perspective, oh, if something goes wrong while you're cleaning it up, is it going to cost us to pay out if it hits somebody else's satellite? And there are the intellectual property implications. Okay, well, if you're going to collect up bits of our old satellite, are you going to reverse engineer it? Are you going to study it? Maybe there's some national security concerns if it's a defense-based satellite. Issues of classification. So there are a lot of problems and a lot of hurdles to overcome in terms of debris cleanup, active debris removal, and on-orbit servicing that will, if we can overcome those hurdles, really make a positive difference in our ability to continue to use and develop space in the future.
So let me ask you a question about that. What about responsibility? So right now we've seen a situation where two different countries have purposely destroyed assets in space to prove that they could, and but they have no responsibility for cleaning up their mess.
More than two. So I assume you're referring probably to the Chinese ASAT test that happened over 10 years ago now, and the Indian ASAT test that happened earlier this year. There was also a US test that took place following the Chinese test. That was Operation Burnt Frost, I believe. If you Google that, it's open source. It's available to look at that. But the Chinese test actually created a substantial amount of debris. That was one of two major debris spikes that we've seen, the other one being the collision between the Iridium and Cosmos satellites, which was entirely accidental. So after the Chinese tested that ASAT weapon, the outcry from the public was, or from the community who was in the know about it anyway, was pretty substantial in terms of the amount of debris that was created and how irresponsible, to use your word for responsibility, creating that much debris would be. And so you saw after that the US tests and subsequent tests designed to create much lower debris, or much lower amounts of debris. So the question then becomes, is that responsible behavior? If you're testing these things and they're creating minimal debris, is that okay? And it's debris that is going to deorbit very quickly anyway and burn up in the atmosphere. Or is the fact that, well, the test could go wrong, could create more debris, is that irresponsible in and of itself, even if it turns out okay in that instance, that there's a possibility that it could go wrong? And that's something that the international community is grappling with right now. So the statements at UN COPIOS Legal Subcommittee earlier this year were mostly couched in vague terms, saying, we need to be cautious about debris creation. Debris creation is irresponsible. Anything that intentionally creates debris is a problem, without specifically calling out or decrying the test itself. And so I think that's something that we need to watch and pay attention to. The Indian test did not create a lot of debris, but it maybe could have, right? And there were some comments that the NASA administrator made regarding whether or not it could, early comments, whether or not it could potentially endanger the space station or lives on the space station. And certainly those kinds of things are a concern as well. And so this is one of the areas where norms are still developing, and we're going to have to watch that going forward. The Outer Space Treaty does have a provision in it that states that if an activity could cause harmful interference with another state's space activities, they need to consult in advance. And so that mechanism did not come into play in any of the tests that we're talking about, although arguably with the Chinese test, from an academic perspective, perhaps it should have. But that's one way to consider looking at these tests moving forward. If this is something that countries feel are important and they need to continue doing, well, an advance notification, make sure there's deconfliction of satellites, et cetera, before running the test would be one way to make that less likely to cause damage and easier to accept for the international community if that's something that's important enough to states that they want to continue doing that moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you. That was fantastically informative. Really appreciate it. So switching gears here a little bit, most of us who are in this industry, we're here because we're true believers, right? We love what we do. We love this industry. We love the idea of going to space. And so I find that most of the people I know in this industry also donate their time and their resources to nonprofit organizations, activist organizations, and industry associations. So do you do anything outside of work hours that's space related? And if so, tell me about the causes that are important to you.
So there are two space-related things that I do sort of overlapping with work to some degree in terms of my academic work. I am a legal advisor for All Moonkind. They have recently had some major wins. And if you Google For All Moonkind, you'll see that there's actually legislation proposed now dealing with the Apollo 11 landing site and protecting the elements of that landing site that have been certainly pushed forward by the work of For All Moonkind. I initially saw their proposals coming out when they started in, I want to say 2017 is when I first saw it, early 2017. And I had some concerns about the way that they were putting their message forward. I had done some research and writing on cultural heritage in space previously, and there were mentions of the World Heritage Convention or getting a UN convention moving forward to protect heritage in space. And so I reached out and said, hey, the World Heritage Convention actually can't be used in that way because it has to be within the territory of a country for a country to put it on the World Heritage List. That's just the way the convention is written. And so it's not going to be able to apply to outer space. And yeah, maybe we could have a specific convention for space moving forward, but if so, that's a long road. There's not a lot of political will for new multilateral treaties. And let's look at some other options that are on the table because, yes, we need to preserve humanity's cultural heritage in space, on the moon and on Mars, if the early rovers on Mars. But we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that's feasible and practical for the political realities that we live in. And the founder, Michelle Hanlon, who actually now is teaching at the University of Mississippi, she came in when I left, was very receptive and very open to that discussion. And her work and the work of the organization have really evolved and made positive change going forward. And I think that's going to be a name that you continue to see. So I enjoy my work with For All Moonkind. I don't spend as much time on it as perhaps I would like to, but it's definitely something interesting to watch. I'm also a member of the IASL, the International Institute of Space Law, which is the professional organization for space lawyers. And so if you're interested in getting involved in space law, if you're a student, I would recommend joining as a prospective member and getting to know the organization because that's really that network that I talked about that you're going to build if you want to break into that industry. Outside of space, there are some other things I do as well. I am very passionate about dogs and rescue. I have 2 rescue beagles, and I have done some work with Beagles of New England States. And I also volunteered some time bringing my dog, when I only had one, to the Humane Society in Oxford, Mississippi, to socialize other dogs because he gets along with everybody. That's how I wound up with the second beagle, because they had a beagle who was very fearful and came from a bad background, and they didn't think they were going to be able to get her adopted out. And it was a kill shelter. And I said, okay, I'll take her. So I wound up with a second one and then stopped bringing Harvey there to socialize other dogs. So I think it's important to maintain and keep interests that are not just space. As much as I love space and I'm passionate about it, I think it is super important that you have something that's totally outside of work and that you can think about and divert time to that's not necessarily work related, even if your work is something that you're passionate about. The last thing that I'll mention that I'm involved in is a nonprofit called Be Epic Inc. It is a role-playing organization. So it's for live action role-playing. We founded in 2007 or 2008, I don't remember exactly which, to run a particular role-playing game set in a sort of Victoriana steampunk setting.
Fun.
And since then, though that game has come to an end and we've sunset that, we've been successful enough that we've been able to help other new game directors and new LARPs get off the ground, helping them with insurance and funding and logistics and management and that kind of stuff. And so it sounds kind of silly, right? Adults putting on costumes and running around in the woods. But I think it's a really valuable way to explore your imagination, your creativity, storytelling, and also, to learn and develop new skills and new aspects of yourself that you may not have really thought about otherwise. So I know that for me, getting to be able to play a character that's, either a really good guy or a villain or something outside of what's normal in day-to-day modern life lets you kind of experiment with problem solving and how you deal with different challenges and how you deal with different personalities and the decisions that you make. And being able to experiment in a safe environment with those kinds of choices really gives you more tools to figure out, okay, well, how do I deal with a difficult personality at the office? Let me think about ways that I've done that, in a role-playing environment. And done so successfully or done so unsuccessfully, and see if that applies here and that helps here. And sometimes it really does. It's, a positive learning experience. And even if you don't get something profound out of it like that, you still get fun and imagination and a chance to check out from the problems and challenges of the day-to-day world and spend time with your friends and be outside and get some physical exercise. So
excellent. It sounds like a lot of fun. Yeah, it really does. I have a bit of a theater background, so I would enjoy that very much. All right. So what's your vision for humanity's future in space? What do you see coming down the road, and how soon do you think we'll be there?
I'm really hoping that we will get a permanent settlement on the moon sooner rather than later, certainly within my lifetime. The new Artemis missions that have been proposed talk about putting the first woman on the moon and the next man on the moon in 2024. I sincerely hope that we can achieve that timeline, because in order to get a permanent presence on the moon, we've got to get back to the moon at all in the first place. Earlier today, in my comments on my panel, I mentioned that I had been thinking recently about the fact that the first heavier-than-air aircraft-powered flight happened in 1903. And then we put men on the moon in 1969. So 66 years is all it took from the development of the first airplane to literally putting humans on the moon, right?
Yeah.
Less than one
amazing.
lifetime. You could be old enough as a child to experience and see the first aircraft flight, and then as an elderly person, see and experience the first landing on the moon. And that, to me, thinking about it in those terms, was really mind-blowing. And I think that just demonstrates, first of all, that we could be doing better right now than we are, but also how much is really possible in a relatively short amount of time when those goals become important to us and when we want to engage in those goals. And so there's some pessimism around, dates always keep getting pushed. We haven't been back to the moon in so long. What's happened to our technology? What's happened to our society? But the flip side of that is, well, if we dedicate ourselves to it, look, we can prove it can happen in a very short development time span. And so my hope is that we'll get back to that and we will have a permanent settlement on the moon and at least humans visiting Mars by the time the end of my lifetime comes, that I will have gotten to see and experience that, because I do really want us to become a multiplanetary species.
And so when the time comes to settle space, will you be among the first to go?
Absolutely. I'll go right now. Yeah. Sign me up.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for being here today. And I just wanted to ask if you had anything to leave the audience with to help motivate them to join the movement and to come with us when we go settle space.
Oh, that's a profound question. Can I answer with an anecdote instead of an inspiring statement?
Okay. Of course.
So when I was a kid, my mom really wanted me to go to a private high school because she thought, oh, this is the way people succeed. This is what we need to do. None of this public school. We'll get a scholarship. We'll do what we have to do. And so I was interviewing to Phillips Academy Andover to try to get in there. And I went into the interview all confident. And they asked me at one point in the interview, and I'm in 8th grade, so I was about 13. They asked me at one point in the interview, who's your role model? And I looked them straight in the eye without hesitation. And I said, Jean-Luc Picard, Captain Picard.
Love it.
Right. And so they asked me why, and I explained why. And, his very cooperative attitude, his management style, but most importantly, his thinking that there's always an option. There's always a solution to a problem, even if it's not immediately apparent. Ultimately, I was waitlisted from Phillips Andover, probably because I said my role model was Jean-Luc Picard. But looking back on that moment, even though it was kind of a setback in some way, or at least I think of it as a setback, I think that was actually a really important thing for me to realize. Okay, this is who my role model was growing up, and this is what I looked forward to. And that's still the mindset that I'm in now, trying to help propel humanity into space. And so the 2 lessons I would take from that are, 1, there is always an option. Always look for that option. Picard was right. And 2, don't worry about how silly something seems. Silly seeming things can be important. And that's why I'm teaching sci-fi and military culture leading into this academic year as well.
Sounds so much fun. Thank you, Andrea. I really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Mission Eve is a production of the Center for Space, Commerce, and Finance, a 501c3 nonprofit dedicated to educating entrepreneurs and investors about their respective challenges and opportunities as it relates to space. Meagan Crawford has been your host and executive producer. Aaron Pagel is the executive director for the center and producer and editor for this episode. Marketing and communications for Mission Eve is managed by Nikki Martinez. Theme music has been composed by Liz Foal. If you'd like to support this podcast, please visit patreon.com/missioneve to become a monthly subscriber. We have multiple tiers available with benefits like personalized thank yous, access to limited edition t-shirts, opportunities to engage with our interviewees via online Ask Me Anything sessions, and small group gatherings with Meagan Crawford when available. Any support you can offer will go a long way to helping us continue to tell the stories of the women who are making life in space a reality. Please follow us on Facebook at facebook.com/Center for Space Commerce and Finance, Twitter at CSCF_nonprofit, and LinkedIn at linkedin.com/company/CSCF. Thank you very much for listening.